Welcome to episode 2 of the video series, Yes, It's True. A thriving Amish community once existed in Butler County, Ohio. In this episode, titled What's in a Name, Amish or Mennonite, we will talk about the origins of the Amish. But as you will soon see, it is not possible to get to the origins of the Amish without also discussing the Mennonite. And these insights will set the stage for addressing the evolution of our Amish community in upcoming episodes. Amish and Mennonite roots date back to the Protestant Reformation in 16th century Europe and the radical Anabaptist movement which originated in Switzerland in 1525. The early Anabaptist movement was made up of small, scattered groups with diverse interpretations of faith and practice. But fundamental to the Anabaptist movement was rejection of infant baptism and acceptance that baptism represents a voluntary adult believer's decision to commit one's life. The belief system as well was firmly rooted in the New Testament as opposed to traditional church doctrine. Because early Anabaptists had all been baptized as infants by state-sponsored religions, either Catholic or Protestant, their practice led to their characterization as Anabaptist, meaning rebaptizers, by their detractors and enemies. Anabaptists called for a voluntary church separate from government oversight, essentially the first promoters of separation of church and state. They refused to swear oaths of allegiance, did not hold public office or engage in civic affairs, and because of their fundamental belief in non-resistance, refused to serve in the military. Their radical beliefs posed a direct threat to state-sponsored Catholic and Protestant leaders, as well as governmental civil authorities, and led to severe persecution through the first century of the movement, including executions, torture, and imprisonment. A major figure in the Anabaptist movement was Menno Simons of the Netherlands. Menno Simons was originally a Catholic priest who withdrew from the priesthood in 1536. He went on to become a key leader in the Dutch Anabaptist movement and wrote over 40 books and a large volume of letters in support of the movement over his lifetime. In the early years, members of the Anabaptist movement were referred to as Mennonite by their detractors. It was the Dutch and North German Anabaptists who first adopted the name Mennonite for themselves. In Switzerland, the home of the original Anabaptist group, first formed in 1525, was known as the Swiss Brethren. They too were heavily influenced by the teachings of Menno Simons. Through the 1600s, the Swiss Brethren continued to face persecution and oppression, and by late in the century, these conditions forced a sizable migration north of Switzerland to the Alsace region of France and to the Palatinate and Hesse regions of Germany across the Rhine River. One of the leaders in the Swiss Brethren Church who had migrated to the French Alsace was Jacob Ammann. In 1693, more than 150 years after the beginning of the Anabaptist movement, Ammann led a renewal effort that promoted doctrinal purity and imposed stricter discipline in the congregations. He forbade the trimming of beards and the wearing of fashionable dress. He promoted the practice of shunning excommunicated members. However, the conflict caused by his various measures soon ended in a permanent rupture with the leadership of the Swiss Brethren. After the break, followers of Jacob Ammann grew through the areas inhabited by the Swiss Brethren. As highlighted in episode 1 of our series, our first Butler County, Ohio Amish families, led by Christian Augsburger, who settled in 1819, came from the same French Alsace region as Jacob Ammann. The term Amish, as with Anabaptist and Mennonite in the early days, was a form of derision used by outsiders. The name actually did not change from a descriptor to a proper noun of the Amish until after settlement in America starting in the 1700s. As for the Swiss Brethren, at some point following the Big Break, they adopted the name of Mennonite. There is real irony in that outcome because Jacob Ammann, in fact, was attempting to move the Swiss Brethren to closer alignment with the teachings of Menno Simons. And yet it was his followers who ended up with the name Amish, while the Swiss Brethren took the name of Mennonite. As you can see, the Amish and Mennonite share a common heritage but have been separate groups within the Anabaptist family since the break in 1693. Even though they came from the same roots, there was antagonism between the groups in the 1700s. This carried over with migration to America during that period, up to the American Revolution. The Amish and Mennonites settled in the same general areas, principally in eastern Pennsylvania, but there was not close affiliation between the groups. If they were sort of like cousins, they certainly were not kissing cousins. As for the ultimate fate of the Amish in Europe, in 1937, the last Amish congregation merged with a nearby Mennonite congregation in Zweibrücken, Germany, and so the identity of the Amish drew to a close. Meanwhile, in America, with the Amish population in the early 1900s at around 5,000, by 2019 the population had grown to over 330,000. Next up in our series is Episode 3, Coming to America, in which we will turn to the emigration of our Butler County Amish from Europe. Stay tuned.